Hello and welcome to a slightly delayed podcast. We had hoped to be doing this a few weeks ago. However, unfortunately, real life intervened for us, for team members along the way. And so apologies for that. But hopefully we'll make it with quantity, if not quality. The usual team are here, obviously myself, Richard Jeffrey Cook and Matt Haywood.
Good evening.
Evening.
So, this podcast, we're going to look east for our usual history and list section. We're going as far east as Korea, in fact. And for this episode, Matt is going to take us through some of the history, so Richard gets a bit of a break.
Hurrah!
Although he will be contributing on armies. But before we get to that, so that Richard doesn't get too complacent, I thought we'd, instead of putting the sort of news items at the end like we normally do, I thought I'd do them up front because we're coming to the end of the year and there's a number of things in the pipeline. And of course, list books get a bit of a refresh at this time of the year. So I thought I'd just ask Richard if it was okay, if he would give us a bit of an update on where we are with the rules PDF project, 2023 army lists. And if there are any changes to those that he wishes to flag in advance now, or whether you're all going to get it as a big Christmas present.
Thank you, Nick. So, first up, the PDF edition. So the PDF edition is making good progress. We've had a first proof back from the layout guy, and it's looking very good. And I'm in the that has been proofread and a number of corrections back to get corrected. So all things being fair and equal, I would hope that project should produce fruit early in the new year. Just to stress, by the way, we're not introducing any rule changes. So the existing companion books will be perfectly valid should you not wish to acquire the PDF edition. But hopefully the PDF edition will prove a useful alternative.
Probably just worth mentioning that obviously if you don't use the PDF, you'll want to keep hold of the clarifications document.
Yes, the clarifications will be revised to make sure everything is in line with the PDF edition as well. So that's the progress on the rules. Following on from that, we'll complete the Pacto edition because the PDF edition will actually only cover Maximus and Magna, and the Pacto will get its own special PDF version with new Pacto specific diagrams as well.
All right.
So that's the news on the PDF edition. On the 2023 list changes, those are pretty much complete. I've had excellent help from a very good group of proofreaders whose names I don't have to hand, so for fear of forgetting somebody, I'll not mention them at this stage, but my thanks, guys, for all the work you've done on that. So just got a few final corrections to put in place. The plan I have for those is that there will be a sneak preview available, so there will be a link going up on the forum for people to actually check out the 2023 lists, hopefully at the start of December. This will be on the basis that there might be a few errors, so if they get pointed out, they might be corrected before the lists are formally published, which hopefully will be at the start of the new year. Just to summarize the important changes, the first one to mention probably is that all armies are now given index numbers. So they'll get a 4-digit number. The first digit will indicate the era 1 for chariot, 2 for classical, 3 for early medieval, 4 for Asian, 5 for medieval, 6 for Americas, and 7 for Renaissance, which will cover the Italian wars and the last 3 Japanese lists. The second digit will indicate the list set. The third and fourth digits give the unique army number. So starting with 1101 for early Sumerian, running through to 7203 for the Takeda, or Japanese, I think, will be the last list in the Renaissance set.
There'll be a prize for anybody who can memorize all of the lists.
Yeah, and no prize for the first person who spots the inconsistency in, but all the allies will have the army index number listed, and all the historical enemies will have the army index number listed.
Oh, blimey. That's a lot more than I was expecting, Richard. That's fantastic.
The second change worth noting is that all the notes, rather than appearing at the bottom of the army lists, have now been placed in context. So if there's a note specific to a particular troop type, it'll actually appear directly below that troop type. So no having to scroll up and down or missing out the particular notes as well. In terms of the changes themselves, the 2 substantive changes are, first of all, to Thureophori. Thureophori will no longer have shove, but they will have an all or none option to change them to be loose, short spear, experienced javelin. So if you don't agree with the interpretation of Thureophori being sort of close order, long spear armed, sort of later type hoplites, then you've got the alternative of having them as more loose, flexible types. The other big change is to late Roman and early Byzantine legionaries and scutatoi, who will now have the shield wall characteristic. That means they'll be more resilient to charging tribesmen with depth charges, which seems historically justified. And related to that, the cost of shield wall will increase, but the cost of shove is being reduced. So most armies that were valid in the 2022 lists should remain valid for the 2023 lists, with a few exceptions being armies that are heavy on shield wall troops. They might have to reduce their numbers of shield wall troops very slightly to affect that. Other than that, there are a lot of very minor corrections, typos, tweaks, a few restrictions put in for sort of unreasonable things. Like a good example of that would be the Imperial Roman Praetorian Guard. You now can't have 2 units of 4. You can only have 1 unit of Praetorian Guard, and they have to be in the army commander's command. There are a few adjustments also to make allies, some of the allies more reasonable to use. I suppose and there are other specific things like the Khwarazmia, which were the Khwarezmians that fought for some of the Arab states after being ousted from Persia by the Mongols. They now form a separate contingent rather than being a Khwarezmian ally. And it's worth also saying a few lists have been relocated in list sets, so that, for example, the French lists in Reconquista have been relocated to the Valois list set. A couple of the Arab armies that fought in Spain have been added to the Reconquista set and removed from the Africa set. There are other sort of minor changes, a bit too numerous to mention here.
Yeah,
and that's the 2023 list sets.
Can I just ask one quick question on clarification, Richard, to do with the addition of shield wall to the sort of later Roman, early Byzantine? Because that came out, I think I was involved with. Am I right that that applies to the short spear interpretation?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, not the impact weapon, which is an option in the Imperial Roman list.
Yeah, it applies to the ones with short spear. Yes.
So
exactly.
Yeah, just for the Imperial Roman list, because it can have both. So that becomes an offensive or defensive option choice, really. Presumably all or none.
It's generally a compulsory for the Byzantine lists. It's not an option.
Okay, yeah.
So they will now have to take shield wall as a characteristic.
Makes sense indeed. Okay, so I mean you've had a lot of hard work recently, haven't you?
Yeah, that one's been building up over a period of time. But yes, I'll be glad when it's all done.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, you get my thanks.
And then ready for the next year's.
ready for the next slew of. Oh, have you thought about this?
Yes. Well, those come up a day after I've just finalised the list, just to frustrate me usually.
Would we do that to you?
Yes, of course you
would. God, he knows as well.
It's in the diary. It pops up on January the 1st. Send Richard a list suggestion. So anyway, thank you very much for that, Richard. Obviously, thank you for the hard work, because it is a lot of hard work, and certainly I think the changes like the numbers and indexing of the allies and whatever, I think will be really, really useful, and things like, just from thinking the list checking I do, having the notes under the relevant troop type, because some of them can be very easily missed, but no matter how many times you look at the rules. I think the one I always miss is the limitation on the date integral arch as in the early Imperial Roman. Yeah, I've certainly missed that more than once. So having it there in more plain view should help no end. Okay. Before we go on to the history bit, I'd just like to touch on, since we're talking about next year, about competitions. We already have a healthy amount of competitions listed, arranged for next year. They're listed on the forum. Also, Robin Spence kindly operates a regular and ad hoc mailing list, which repeats the details of upcoming comps, reminds you about the more recent one. Sorry, the more soonest coming up. That was terrible English, wasn't it? The soonest coming up. I'm sure there's a better way of doing it than that. Anyway, so if you're not on it and would like to, get in touch with Robin. You can certainly find him on Facebook, or if you're on the WhatsApp group, or even put a message up on the forum, and I'm sure he will add you to the list. In specific comps, the tickets have literally today, well, the day we were recording this podcast anyway, gone on sale for Roll Call 2023. Mention that specifically because we are, for the first time, I think, running a 28mm Magna competition there. So, chance for people to play with the big toys, sorry. Could be big boys as well, who knows, or both. Your choice. And I know quite a few people are already digging out armies that have been buried for a number of years, because they haven't been used, because we haven't had competitions for that. So looking forward to that. So if you're interested in that, get your list in. If you're interested but don't have an army, maybe one of the people who are digging out their collections of 25, 28mm troops will have something to lend to people. Again, just ask people on Facebook, the forum, or wherever. I'm going to just badger Richard one more time, partly because I know that today he has been playing a 28mm Magna game. So if it just give us if you just some bullet points on what are the significant differences from the 15mm Maximus games that most of us are used to. Richard, over to you again.
Okay, so the main differences are, first of all, the unit group sizes are reduced. Magna army lists have the full details, but typically UG unit groups that are 4s or 6s in the Maximus list will be 4s in the Magna list. If they're 6 or 8s, they will become 4s. And if they're 6, 8s or 9s or bigger, they generally become 4s or 6s. Elephants are usually in 2s, as are artillery. I think that's a fair summary of the unit size changes. The second big change is that all the terrain deployment is 2/3 of the MeG Maximus size. So if you're playing with 28mm on a 6x4 table, 180 centimetre by 120 centimetres, then you will find the terrain sizes, because your base width in 28mm will be 60mm, the terrain sizes will be 40mm, which happens to match the 15mm game.
Nobody separate terrain.
Yeah, so that applies to the terrain sizes, the distances you move terrain, and the width of the flank zone for deploying terrain. As I mentioned, the base width is obviously 60mm in Magna. The deployment area, however, remains the same, so you still have deploy 6 base widths from the center of the table, and you still have a 5 base width flank zone. So your deployment area is somewhat constrained. Yes, so if you had something like 120 infantry bases in your army, you might struggle to fit it onto the table.
Bloody impressive in 25.
It would be very impressive if you managed that. I don't know if a slave revolt could manage it, possibly. Yeah, the only other significant change is that skirmishers will shoot at full effect with 2 ranks and a reduced effect with 1 rank, unlike the Maximus where skirmishers are on 3 and 2. The cab tests are reduced so that poor troops roll on a yellow, average troops on a green, superiors, exceptionals, battle wagons and elephants would roll on a white dice. The final one, I think, is that pike in only deploy in 3 ranks rather than 4 because the unit size is 6. They get a +1 for having a 3rd rank at impact in Magna, whereas it would be a +1 for 4th rank in Maximus. I think that's basically it. Other than that, it's the Maximus game you know and love.
I hadn't spotted the cab test change, I must admit. Shows how much I've been paying attention.
That one is strictly actually a rule change.
Oh, right.
It's not in the, it's a rule change we've introduced for Magna to moderate the effect of cab tests, to make them not overly powerful.
Okay, I do remember you previously talking about it for Pact.
Yeah. For Pacto, we are also proposing to drop them 1 further colour.
Oh, right.
So go down to green dice for poor, white dice for average, and blacks for superiors, exceptionals, battle wagons, and elephants.
Okie dokie. That's useful to know. I think I will then put something on the forum post about roll call just to highlight that, because I think that's one people might miss. But I can see the logic behind it because of the generally smaller units. Things could explode very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's the logic behind it. What you do find, however, is the command distances are that much greater in Magnus, so it's rarer to have units out of command distance.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
10 base widths on a 60 centimeters is wider than 10 base widths on a 40 millimeter frontal if you're playing with 15 millimeter Maximus.
Yeah, and with most units only being 2 wide rather than 3, it will make a difference.
I think it's probably fair to say that infantry will be more favoured in or punchy cavalry perhaps rather than the skirmishers, just because there's less room to run away on a Maximus, on a Magna table.
Yeah, but equally shooting could be a bit more effective because
shooting can be more effective because units generally have a frontage of 2, and being smaller, the shooting dice are more powerful. Yeah, proportionately. Yeah. No, but when you roll double blank with green dice, it doesn't really make much odds.
Blanks are blanks are blanks, regardless of the game. Yeah. No, I think it'd be nice that it will play a little bit different from Maximus game. So
you might want to screen your infantry as well, because of the powerful effect of shooting with skirmishers.
Yeah, no,
you might see a few more skirmishers.
No, I think it's good because it means you're not just going to be replicating what you're doing in 15 mil. So as different army choices. Anyway, again, thank you, Richard, for that. That's incredibly useful. But moving on, Matt, your hour cometh. You're going to take us through some Korean history, and no doubt we are all going to have a little lesson and maybe struggle with some pronunciation, because we usually do, especially when we move to the Far East. So I'll thank you in advance for taking this on, because the pronunciation is just something that I just know we can just make fools of ourselves with. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you. And I am so good at pronouncing words. It's not like that skirmishing with the Africans. No, the Spanish.
the Spanish skirmishing formation.
Yes, exactly. So yes, I've spelled them all out phonetically, so I'm hoping that I won't embarrass myself too badly with this. Anyway, here we go. So Korea. So talking about Korean history is pretty much like talking about Italian history. The core geography is about the same, but everything else changes. There is no consistency whatsoever. So I'm going to start by completely glossing over everything before about 50 BCE. I mean, before then, it's really interesting. It's a huge mess of politics, civil war, invasions, name changes, migrations, not to mention much of the mythology and myth that go into making it all. But it doesn't make much sense in a historical point of view. So I'm not going to dwell on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from what emerged from this cauldron. And that's the Three Kingdom period. As you will note, it's identically named to the Three Kingdom period in Chinese history. That's because we like to confuse everybody. That's the way it went. Now, the Chinese and the Koreans, funny enough, actually ended up calling it the Samhan period, which is what they used in their sources to describe the Three Kingdoms of Korea. Now, the Three Kingdoms of Korea at this point are... Right, here we go. There is the Goguryeo Kingdom. I've got to be very careful with this one. It sounds like beach, but it's technically pronounced biatch. As you can, I know.
That was about to create a laugh, so I just okay.
Yeah,
I fell into that one immediately. Yeah.
Yes. I'm afraid that is exactly how it's pronounced. And the last one is the Shila. For the MeG references, these are the 3 main Korean armies out of the Three Kingdoms book. In order of likely founding, and also the eventual winner in this original Squid Game, we have the Shila. They appeared as a small city-state around 50 BCE and were centered in the lower southeast of the Korean peninsula. Its immediate rival, the Biash, centered in the southwest. The Goguryeo were north and stretched into Manchuria. Now, the Shilla at this point were not a notable player in the region until well into the 4th century. They were one of these slow climbing, but like Rome in the early days, they just developed pretty much on their own in isolation, picked off their neighbors, slowly built up. But by the 4th century AD, CE, the Jim clan were able to establish a hereditary monarchy, which they would manage to stay in power for about 500 years. This slow build was almost stopped in its tracks by an invasion by the western neighbor, the Biash kingdom, and their Japanese allies, which from about the 4th to the 6th century, the Japanese were quite heavily involved in, not necessarily the military side, but the politics side in Korea. They played all 3 kingdoms off against each other, but the Biash were the ones they mostly dealt with. There was a lot of culture exchange, and the Japanese supplied military equipment. Anyway, right. This particular conflict forced the Shilla into an alliance with a much more formidable northern neighbor, the Goguryeo. And the end result was the Shilla were able to successfully withstand the Biash attacks, but were forced into a subordinate relation with the Goguryeo. Within 30 years, they managed to extract themselves from the subordinate relationship by allying with their old enemies, the Biash, and by cultivating alliances with China. Do what you need to do to stay alive, basically. The alliance of the 2 smaller states kept the Manchurian-centric northern Goguryeo stable. When we talk about the military side of the armies, there's quite a disparity in sizes. But anyway, sorry. But then what happens is a fairly new minted Shilla monarch named Jin Hung. He came to the throne as a baby. His mother was the regent. Almost as soon as he came to power, much like others in history, he basically escorted his mother to the nearest monastery and said, stay there, love. I'll take it over now. Please don't visit again unless I ask you to. So what he did on arrival was he immediately overhauled and reorganized the military. And within a decade of these reforms, with their allies, in the Biash kingdom, they launched a very effective campaign against the Goguryeo and wrestled control of the strategically important Han River estuary from them. Now, in terms of geography of Korea, the Han estuary is basically where Seoul sits, the modern day Seoul, that is. And it basically cuts a dividing line in this period. They end up controlling the only route between the other 2 kingdoms because of this attack. So having grabbed this valley, in a ruthless stroke of genius, Jin Hung promptly breaks his alliance with the Biash, allies with the Goguryeo, ambushes and destroys the main Biash main army, assassinates their king, and he manages to establish complete control over this valley. His narrow ally, the Goguryeo, who had originally owned it, let them. Didn't seem to ruffle any feathers. Now, I'm assuming, presumably, the magnitude of the defeat they'd handed to the Biash was regarded as a fair exchange for the land territories. Jin Hung, having effectively created this new military aristocracy and reforms of the military, he dies in 576, leaving a greatly expanding kingdom. Part of his reforms is he's created a new military, a new military elite, almost a social order in the Hwarangong, which would eventually play a significant role in their continued rise. With their neighbours, the Biash weakened, their main rival of Korean dominance remains the Goguryeo. His successors tried to counter them by formulating relationships with China. They attempted to form a mutual alliance with what was currently the Tang regime. As always seems to be the way these things go, whilst focusing on the Goguryeo, the Biash emerged as a threat under a new leader, and in 642, they launched a series of successful attacks, seizing various fortifications along the borders. The same year saw the murder of the king of the Goguryeo in a coup. The newly minted supreme dictator promptly allies with the Biash to balance out the Tang-Shilla alliance. The Tang, being the Tang, take the murder of the old king as a suitable pretext, and they launch an invasion in 645, which lasts some three years before they are repulsed out of the territory with heavy losses. It included a siege on the capital where they built, very Roman style, they built a massive siege mound. what they didn't expect was that the defenders actually launched a counter raid, took it, fortified it, and wouldn't let them back up it. They couldn't take it. Apparently, it was months of furious fighting trying to take this mound back, and they never got anywhere. So in the end, a heavy winter set in, and they had to retreat. So what you ended up seeing was from 648 for another 5 years to 653. There were just border skirmishes. Nothing significant happened in either way. The Biash received military aid from the Japanese in 653, and this increased the pressure on the Shilar, but they couldn't break past the Han Valley, which separated them from linking up with their allies, the Goguryeo. Another Tang attack on the Goguryeo was repulsed in 658. So a change in tactics was required because they were just getting nowhere. And at the urging of the Shilar, Tang troops joined in the joint attack on the Biash, which saw all organized resistance very quickly crushed. The king was surrendered, the area was subjugated, and what occurred was the Tang took complete control of the Biash kingdom. Now that presumably was not much to the delight of the Shilar allies, who had actually been doing much of the fighting on the southern flank. But before anything could emerge from this disquiet, there was a brief revolt with Japanese support by Biash loyalists, which saw a significant sea battle between the Tang and the Japanese, of which the Japanese lost. There was also a land battle at a place called Pyongyang, which basically ended Biash independence once and for all, sending the remnants of the loyalist forces fleeing north to the Goguryeo. So there you have it. The southern Korea had been secured, although it was in Tang control. 461, Tang invades the Goguryeo with Shilar logistical support, but no troops. It was purely a Tang-led invasion force. Much to their disquiet, one field army immediately gets crushed. The siege on the capital is broken due to, again, extremely poor weather conditions, and the Tang are forced to withdraw. This leaves another 5 years of skirmishing, not much going on, whilst the Tang rebuilt their forces, dealt with a couple of revolts elsewhere in the country. And what you do see, though, is in 466, the supreme dictator of the Goguryeo dies. Natural death, just falls over dead. And again, as usually happens in history, his sons started increasingly violent disputes about who should take over. The end result is one defects to the Tang, another one defects to the Shilar, and the Tang fairly obviously uses it as an opportunity for an invasion. In 668, the capital falls, and the Goguryeo are finally defeated. It's done and dusted. The war is at an end. 669, the following year, Tang establishes prefectures to run all captured territories, excludes the Shilar from everything. So the instigator of all this, the Shilar, have been left with nothing. Then the Tang start suggesting to the Shilar that, well, maybe you should become a protectorate of Tang, China, let us do all the heavy lifting. The Shilar don't take that particularly well, and in 670, they rally the old loyalist remnants of the Bijar and the Goguryeo and start a war to regain Korean territory. And this is the first time it becomes Korean territory. It's Korea. It is a single unity. That's what they're after. It lasts 6 years, and it sees the Tang actually pushed out of much of Korea. They reach the river Taedong in the north, and that basically becomes the stabilizing line. All south of the river becomes Shilar. All north belongs to Tang, or what actually becomes an emerging successor state to the old Goguryeo called the Balhae, who remain frenemies, for a better word, to both the Shilar and the Tang. They play each other off quite well, and sometimes they're allied to Tang, and you find that represented in MeG. They're actually allies, I think, to both. But anyway, so Korea stabilizes under the Shilar as a unified whole, and it remains that way till about the late 1890s, where it briefly disintegrates into what is called imaginatively the later Three Kingdom period. We're going for the names here. But that lasts less than 50 years, and it actually gets reunified quite quickly under the Goryeo Kingdom, which is where we get the anglicized name Korea. and that would in turn morph into the Joseon Korean period in the late 14th century after a somewhat unwise attack on the Ming Chinese by the Goryeo dynasty led to a very brief power struggle, and they got taken over. And that's where I'm going to stop with the history, because now we're pretty much pushing the Goryeo period would see the Mongols, and the Joseon Korean would actually push us into the Renaissance, and the Mongol period itself is so vast. I'm not going to go there, so if we stop there. But from the history point of view, but in terms of the military, I just want to quickly touch on them. In terms of military finesse, there are common elements across the three kingdoms. Not surprisingly, given they spent much of their time fighting each other, you're likely to develop similar military systems. What you've got are foot troops, where present, which were your usual polearm, long spear, anti-cavalry formations, which were either mixed with archers or crossbows, or alongside similar, either blocked out as individual units or mixed in as a cohesive whole. It's worth noting that the Shila apparently manufactured exceptionally superior crossbows, much sought after by the Tang. The list itself doesn't allow you to take Shila crossbowmen. So something I might do some digging in to see how prevalent it was, or whether it was just the export market, which I suppose is possible. But it is noted in some of the sources that their crossbows were very effective, 1,000-pace range, and that kind of thing.
Yes, the absence of crossbows from the lists is something that is being looked at. Certainly Korean crossbows were believed to, by the Tang, to have a better range and be more durable. That seems to be the and that may be due to better manufacture of the stocks and the bow itself by the Koreans.
Interesting. Okay. Excellent. Well, there you go. It's already in the pipeline. I've been gazumped.
You have to find something else for that 1st of January.
Yes.
Mail to Richard.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure I'll find something. The difference here. So the foot were broadly similar across the armies. Shila, for example, towards the later period, they ended up with something called 9 legions, which was a mixture of refugee status troops, I guess, that have fled from the other kingdoms, and they created these 9 legions. But they also had garrison troops, royal troops, and militia, and they were very, very structured. You find the Biash infantry were much less well regarded, I guess. That kingdom never seemed to develop quite the disciplined military status of the other two, in that all sources talk about it was very ad hoc. They had royal and garrison troops, but nowhere near the command structure and the levy systems that you saw in the other two. But I'm digressing slightly. But where the differences in the three kingdoms seems more apparent is in their mounted formations. The Goguryeo, with their significant presence in Manchuria, for example, not only had access to many nomadic vassals and allies, they also seem to have readily adopted the more cataphract-style panoply of such as well. They were much more noted that style of warfare, which I'm not surprised, considering a lot of the Shin and the Khitan Lao for areas up there that they had dealings with before and after. So not unexpected. There is some evidence that the other two kingdoms had similar units, but nowhere near the quantity of their northern neighbors. Whether that's sheer numbers, cost, or maybe the type of horses needed, who knows? But they did have some, but not many. The Biash and Shila seem to have had a noble tradition of, certainly for the Shila, of faster, more lightly armored horse archers. The Biash had lancer, long spear. I mean, the list categorizes the nobles as long spear, which is probably fair, but they might have been charging lancers. That I haven't found anything when I was reading that fully described their combat tactic, whether it was a devastating charge or a more fencing style of combat area. So, but the Shila also focused a lot of their horse archer. I was going to say issues, but that's the wrong type of word to use there. their interest in that on the Horang warrior class, which was essentially an almost chivalric noble. Thank you. Order. God, I knew I was going to stumble over something, but I wasn't expecting that one. And also an officer cadet school almost. A lot of their generals and senior leadership would come out of that particular unit classification. And, but you get the Goguryeo, they're described as highly militaristic in outlook with significant military resources, clearly, because they were adequate to beat quite substantially large Tang armies in the field. Interesting, though, they were also seemingly incapable of handling their two very small siblings for any length of time. There's a suggestion, perhaps, that the terrain and the weather, as much as anything, prevented outright victory. The holding of the Han Valley by the Shila is attributed as the main reason why the Biash and Goguryeo alliance was unable to finish them. It took the collapse of the central authority for the Goguryeo to fall, and even then, the Tang only managed that with significant logistical support from the Shila, which, when that was removed, prevented the Tang holding much of their gains when the alliance went south. So,
I think it is also worth noting that the Goguryeo were controlling large areas of Manchuria, what we would consider to be modern China rather than modern Korea. So they had a huge area to try and defend from nomadic tribes to the north, which probably dented how much resource they could actually focus towards the south, which is very different terrain from Manchuria.
Yeah, totally. When you look at the map, their positioning is they're like a slither of Korea, as you say, and then this massive swathe that goes up north into Manchuria and into the what as you say is classically China. And yeah, I'm sure you're right. They had so many areas that they needed to be defending that they could probably never consistently spend enough time in the field to actually beat the snot out of their southern southern partners, so to speak. So anyway, that was the brief rapid gallop through about 800 years worth of Korean history.
Pretty impressive gallop there, and some pretty consistent pronunciation, Matt.
Oh, thank you. As I say, phonetic alphabet's the way to go.
Yeah. So, yeah,
for podcasts anyway.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I might be wrong, but I have had the impression that in terms of sort of transliteration into English characters, there's less of a consistent approach to Korean. Unlike, with Chinese, we used to have Wade Giles, and now we use pinyin generally. There always seems to be more variety with Korean.
There are 4 attributable ways to pronounce things depending on which one you look at. Now, I cheated and I went to YouTube. And then I basically Googled Korean, how do you pronounce? And there are oddly a fairly large section in YouTube for Korean pronunciations, and from that I then phonetically spelled Beeaach or whatever. So yes, it was the closest way I could go. So that's what I did.
It sounds incredibly sensible to me, and I must admit I wasn't sure what they were going to be, but yeah, I think I knew Sheila for some reason because I've seen it spelled SH at the beginning, and that's the one sort of, if you like, closest to how we read it in English. So, okay, well, on to army lists, I guess. Shall I go first? Definitely give you a break, Matt, after that. So thank you very much for that. And I have come up with it's an army I've used. I don't have proper figures for it. It's one I've knocked together before now, which is the Biash Korean. Is that right? Well, close enough.
That's what I'd go with.
Yes, so we'll go with that, which is nothing like how I would pronounce it. because I'd have just gone from the spelling, which would be something like Bakeger or something, you know, but Biash, we'll go with that. So I've gone for a version of this that has a Japanese ally. And I think you mentioned in your history bit that the Japanese were involved with the Biash Kingdom and fought alongside them, and vice versa at the end. So I've gone for that combination. The army I've come up with, it has the Korean part of it has 3 competent professional generals. The Japanese ally is competent instinctive. Get with that. So the camp is unfortified. It comes out with 7 PBS cards and 3 scouting, which is sort of middling, I suppose, sort of average. Anyway, the troops I've got are a 6-base unit of guard cavalry who are formed close, superior, superior, armored horse, fully armored, long spear, shove. So that's the cataphract style cavalry that you mentioned earlier. A 6-base unit of nomad cavalry, formed flexible, average, protected, experienced bow, short spear, melee expert. So a good, useful, multi-use, multi-purpose unit there. A unit of noble cavalry. Now these are split differently between the front rank and the rear rank. They're all formed loose cavalry and protected with long spear. The front rank is superior, the rear rank is average. So that's a unit of 6, so 3 bases of each. 2 units of what are called provincial spearmen in the list, formed flexible infantry, average protected, polearm. Yeah, pretty good all-round troops, and polearm is very useful against cavalry, and cavalry are something of a thing in these armies. A compulsory unit of militia, who are tribal, flexible, poor, unprotected polearm, and 8 bases of those. I think they're a bit, yes, well, you've got to have 8 of them. So, well, you just have to live with them, don't you? Got 1 unit of scouting light cavalry, cavalry skirmisher, average unprotected experienced bow, Cantabrian combat shy, and a 6-base unit of skirmishing archers, infantry, skirmisher, average unprotected experienced bow, combat shy. So they had a bit more shooting capacity, and of course the Cantabrian can be more effective. The Japanese ally, which I quite like, I think it's a bit different. It's just 3 units. 1 is Yugai Guard. These are quite nice. I really like these. Infantry, formed loose, superior protected, experienced bow, melee expert, Pavis. An 8-base unit of those. A 6-base unit spearmen, infantry formed loose, average protected, short spear, shield cover. And then an 8-base unit of archers who are like the guard, but they're average. So they're infantry formed loose, average protected, experienced bow, Pavis, so not melee expert as well. So that's it. It's not an overly massive army. It certainly doesn't fill the table. You want to you probably want to narrow it somewhere along the line, because it's not got vast amounts of cavalry that might run around in open spaces, but it's got a number of units that I think, if you can coordinate them, are quite good. But I would confess that it runs a risk of getting uncoordinated. Those Japanese guard infantry, the superior melee expert with Pavis, can be really, really tough. Especially if they're loose and sitting in terrain, they'll take some shifting. But because they are superior, they're not completely useless in the open either.
What's the? Sorry, what's the? Can you remind me what the Pavis rule is? I can't remember what the
Pavis means if you're shot at, your armor goes up 1 grade. So instead of being protected, they would count as fully armored. And if they are charged by infantry other than dev charges, if I remember rightly, they get a charge phase.
I think that changed, but I'd need to check it.
Yeah.
I think it's now if they're charged by any infantry. But
Oh right, sorry.
So it's +1, is it? In the charge
it's +1
phase?
against infantry. It's of no use against cavalry, who does just knock it over because they're basically large standing shields propped up.
It's a nice centre point, though, isn't it? Because I mean, even cavalry is still charging superior bowmen. It's not going to be a happy experience necessarily if you can't get in.
It's potentially, yeah. I mean, good cavalry or cataphracts will probably just run straight over them.
Well,
good
cataphracts will run over anything, quite frankly.
Oh, it might, yes. So, in terms of the army as a whole, that Japanese contingent is, I think, it's pretty useful, and certainly pretty useful in terrain. And so the guard could be a bit of a nasty shock to somebody. Superior, as I said, superior melee expert, experienced bow. I think it's got the potential of being underestimated, and the Korean part of it, the Baicha part of it, the guard cavalry, superior cataphracts. Okay, like a lot of Eastern cataphracts, they don't have the dev charge, but I've used Eastern cataphracts recently, and I quite like them not having dev charge. You don't have that forced charge at 3 base widths, and then the guard cavalry superior long spear. If in 2 ranks, the long spear can cancel out mounted melee experts. That's useful. Couple them with the noble cavalry. I think you've got a useful striking force, and the nobles. I say the nobles and the nomads can support them quite well. Doesn't have a massive punch, which is why I say I think it's one of those armies you have to work to find the right point to insert your shock troops. So anyway, that's my offering, as we always say, and equally over to you to give me your thoughts and give the listeners your thoughts.
I don't know. It's got that feeling of it to be a really nice grotty terrain army where you can narrow the table because you've got all your foot of very nice terrain troops. All right, you don't want to face warband with it, but who does? But you can direct, and you've got the bows for reach out and touch somebody. And then you can work your guard, you can work your cavalry into the spot where you want to go and upset somebody. I like it. So,
yeah, as I said, I've used it by dummying up the figures. It sort of feels a couple of units too small to me.
I mean, I looked at this earlier. I mean, those long spear superior cavalry of that Arabic feel that we discussed them before. I mean, I think you can get 2 units of them.
You can.
And I'd almost be tempted. I think my preference would be to try and get 2 of those in, but I think the points would be rather tight on that front because what you're paying.
But you could just have another unit if you drop the nomad cavalry, or you might be able to wangle it instead of one of the provincial spearman polearm units.
Yeah, because you're paying what?
Lose something else somewhere. Or maybe even drop a general down, have 11 cards instead of 12.
Well, that's without even putting it on the table. So I may be talking out of my my Korean peninsula on that one.
All I'm fairly sure is I wouldn't want to face it with the army I've selected.
So you wouldn't? Oh, that's a good
sign. Which might be a good time to share my army.
Yeah, if you want. I was just going to say my experience recently using it was the Xianbi Kingdoms, the version that can have the chained archers. I found it had 1 unit of cataphracts, just like this army, and that unit was an absolute star. It was regularly taking on 2 opposing units of, say, the average protected type troops and doing for them. So yeah, I really like those. In fact, recently, this is an aside. Actually, recently it's been a bit of a cataphract meta, hasn't there? We've seen a lot of cataphracts recently. Mr. Hayward being one of the users.
I never left cataphracts. I have an unhealthy obsession with heavy metal, apparently. But yes.
Okay, well, Richard, over to you. Your army then.
Okay, so I went something a bit different. I went with the Balhae Korean.
Okay.
It's probably not how you pronounce it, but so I had an army with. So this is from the Tang China list, worth saying, about 700 CE. It comes with a Tang ally, which is a Tang China Northern army. So 3 commanders. I went for 2 competents and a mediocre to command the Korean element, and a competent ally for the Tang component. It comes with 11 tugs and 1 sug. The Korean element consists of Manchurian cavalry, one of which is formed loose average protected experienced bow short spear. That's dropping it from superior. And one is superior protected unskilled bow short spear melee expert. And there's a theme in this army that I went for the unskilled bow, dropping them from experienced to unskilled, to make it an army that was more focused on fighting than shooting, because I didn't think it would have enough shooting capability to stand up. So along with the Manchurian cavalry, I've got 2 units of nomadic cavalry. These are form flexible average protected. I've gone unskilled bow, short spear, melee expert. So yeah, potential for them to be a flank march, being flexible with protection, short spear and melee expert. They could provide a nasty shock on the wing, was the sort of idea with those. Korean nobles with retainers. So 2 units of these, again 6s, form the front ranks of form loose average protected charging lance and melee expert, with the rear ranks being average unprotected just melee expert.
Interesting.
So and a bit different, and quite a lot of punch, but not too much stamina, I would suggest, with those. Along with a compulsory unit of levy spearmen who are tribal flexible, poor protected short spear. So I'm trying to find somewhere for them to hide, along with the levy archers who are tribal loose, poor, unprotected, experienced bow combat shy. So they're potentially just victims, but at 208 points, they boost the tug count up to 11. And along with that, a unit of scout cavalry who are skirmish average unprotected, experienced bow combat shy Cantabrian. The ally itself is 3 units of Tang cavalry who are all 6s of form loose, average protected, unskilled bow, short spear, melee expert. So the army comes with basically 36 elements of cavalry who are short spear melee expert with bow. 30 of them's average 6 superior. So a lot of potential for fighting and then breaking off, or if you don't want to get into the fight in the first place, evading with your unskilled bow. Yeah, PBS of 8, scouting of 5, which is very healthy.
Very nice.
Yeah, all great unless you're fighting long spear armed cavalry and polearm armed infantry. and superior archers with melee experts sitting behind for pieces.
So you're suggesting that purely by chance I've come up with an army that is good against yours?
Surely not.
Yes. Yeah, I have to say I'm not sure what to make of this. Because what interesting choices.
I have to confess I've never tried it, and I've no idea what it might achieve or not.
Yeah, it's with. I'm sort of instinctively not happy with the downgrading of all those horse archers, but I can see where you're coming from. you've turned it into a fighty, not a shooty army in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, and it's a fair size. You've got a lot of sixes of cavalry there who can fight. They've all got melee expert.
Yeah. I think it's 48 elements of melee expert cavalry there.
Yeah.
Either with short spear or charging lance.
And those mixed units are definitely interesting. But I would agree with you. You know, it could be good on a good impact, probably not great in a prolonged melee. If anybody gets through to the unprotected average. That said, they've still got melee experts, so they're not, you know, they're not hopeless. Yeah. Yeah, Matt, you've got better ideas on these weird armies than me.
Well, it certainly fits in my niche of liking bizarre cavalry armies. I'll give you that. I've got the feeling it actually might be not a bad. Depends on the competition, but I'm thinking those lancers, as you say, they offer an interesting glass hammer, but they can also get out of the way reasonably. I mean, you can pull them out fairly easy. Professional generals. And actually, they're a block of cavalry that you don't mind if they stick. The melee expert's not going to. I mean, all right, you face a Roman with it, you're not going to have much of a good day. But if you're fighting a lot of drossy foot where people are having to expand out to cover 42 paces worth of cavalry, yeah, you know. And as Richard said, those nomads can flank march. I'd have to try it, but I actually don't. You know, I quite like that. There's a definite different choice. As you say, you wouldn't want to go anywhere near a bow-armed army with it. Frankly, you wouldn't want to face something like your Richard's Tang Chinese, for example. That would just be that'd hurt.
Yeah, I was thinking the early Northern Song I used at Ice and Fire earlier this year. I'd love to fight this with it. All the crossbows, but yeah, it's definitely surprised somebody, and you know, because it is a lot of truth. You know, those Tang cavalry and the 127 points of base is nothing for a reasonably competent fighting cavalry unit that can run away if it's not forced to charge. It can, there's something there.
Yeah, I think if you were facing it, you'd have to be very careful on your flanks because there's enough to pin you about the front and enough to get around your sides, and suddenly once they're in, melee is actually worse for you than the charge phase almost, because the melee expert, it's definitely.
Yes, I'm just wondering if it's a little light in command because it's going to want to maneuver a lot.
And they are formed as well. If they were drilled, it'd be different.
Yeah. It's just,
that might be valid.
Yeah. Although obviously, your two levy units, you're not going to do that much with.
Yeah, you've got one card per unit basically.
Yeah.
So you need good cards.
Yeah, I think
if you get a whole string of black cards, you're going to be struggling.
Yeah, mind you, most armies are, but I think just in this one where you might just
this one perhaps more than most.
Yeah, it's I think it really yes. Although it's one of those that it's almost you wouldn't want to lose a unit to get you the extra command.
It's definitely at that point. Yeah. I mean, I had to compromise on something.
Yeah, it's I'd define it under interesting, but it's definitely one worth putting on the table at some time, I would think, just to see how it does work.
Yeah, I'll mention as a list, and you having a Tang Chinese ally gives you various interesting options because you can equally do a Balhai with some quite strong infantry and go very light on the cavalry. This was the opposite. This was a strong cavalry, light on the infantry option.
Yeah, because the infantry is optional, isn't it? Well, I presume it must be, otherwise this list would be
It is if you
completely
don't
illegal.
take any of it.
Yes.
That's the thing. There's a special note on the Tang that you're not obliged to take the infantry if you don't take any of it at all.
Yeah. In some ways, I think I prefer the idea of taking just the cavalry, actually. Because if you replace those with infantry units, I think the Tang infantry is nice, but I think there is something really nice about the fact this is just a big, massive, swirly mass of cavalry.
Yeah, I mean it's a different army, but there is the option to go with Tang infantry and then add the Korean infantry into it to make it quite a strong infantry.
Oh, so yeah, so you mean go.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't just take the Tang infantry option.
Yeah,
I would go with the Korean infantry option as well. Now you're going to ask me what is the option.
I'll sort of assume they can have some reasonable infantry.
Yes, it's similar to the Tang infantry, but without the melee expert.
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah, no, it's a very intriguing army, that, Richard. Very intriguing army.
As I've recently bought a ticket for Fire and Ice, I'm desperately not going to look at it any further because then I'll completely change my mind about what I was going to take.
It's Ice and Fire. Yes, actually,
Ice and Fire. Sorry, yes, I don't know why I got it the wrong way around.
Actually, a lot of people, I don't know. It was the book, the first book of the Game of Thrones one, Song of Ice. Was it Song of Fire and Ice or Song of Ice and Fire?
Song of Ice and Fire, I think.
Oh, so it is Ice and Fire. I had wondered whether it was the other way around, and that's what people were picking up on, because I've seen Fire and Ice mentioned a lot. But we all know what it is. Does it? It is, yeah. Actually, we're not that far off of having to choose our armies for that, are we?
Well, no, particularly as I've just bought, as I say, a ticket became spare and I hadn't bought one. Now I have, and now they're going, oh God, what do I run?
Oh, no, because you've not another last minute entry, so you're going to win it again.
Yeah, that's right. No, I don't think so. Not with my choices usually, but only if I design the list 2 hours before it has to be in. I think it's probably the only way I'd get that to work.
Yeah, don't have a chance to think about it.
That's right.
Very good army choice strategy.
What was it? About 2 hours, and you just picked a box up that that's almost the lightest army you could take.
Yeah, it was literally the first thing that was legal and valid that could be run in period, and it was the Sassanid Persians. Well, it was a load of cataphracts and. Actually, it was a load of cataphracts. Let's leave it at that. That was literally what it was.
Right. Which let us segue into your army now. And have you gone with a load of cataphracts?
Actually, not that many, oddly. So I could take a load of cataphracts, but right. So I've gone with the Go-Goryeo kingdom. Now, fair dues, this list is actually illegal. Which I'll explain. I will explain why when I get to it. But yes, the initial draft was illegal. So this is out of the Three Kingdoms, running an ally that from the one Nick just ran the
Biash,
the talented professional general, and 2 mediocre instinctive generals are the main core of the list. Now, I did this with the Sassanid Persians, oddly, at Warfare. People looked at me a bit peculiar, said, well, why are you paying for a talented professional general and then 2 instinctive generals? It's a fair question. I lose some of the benefit in not being able to card swap, but it means my PBS is now 8, adds a slight chunk to my scouting, extended command and control, at least for the army commander's command, and I can still pay double cards to move any other army unit that's not in his command, that's not the ally. So there are still some benefits to doing it that way. The talented professional, it's the PBS of 8, which is because much like the Sassanids, I think you need to control the terrain a bit with this army, because otherwise you're going to have problems either because of size or whatever nastiness other people do to you. Anyway, so then there is a talented instinctive allied general from the Biash. So the main army is the Sonbai cavalry, which are effectively the guard cavalry for the army. Now they can be cataphracts, but I've chosen to take them as formed loose, superior, protected, experienced bow, short spear, melee expert, block of 6. So quite nice guard cavalry. Then there are what are classed as other cataphracts. I'm assuming they're only other cataphracts if you upgrade the guard, otherwise they're just cataphracts. They've got nothing to compare themselves to. But anyway, sorry. There's a cavalry formed close, average, armored horse, fully armored, long spear, shove, block of 6. You've then got something called the Malgal cavalry, which are formed flexible, average, unprotected, experienced bow, melee expert. It's block of 6. Now, this is the slightly illegal bit. I have 2 blocks of armored spearmen, which are 6 armored spearmen, formed flexible, average, protected, long spear. They then have attached to them 2 armored swordsmen, infantry, formed flexible, average, protected, melee expert. So it's 6 long spear and 2 swordsmen with melee expert to form a single unit of 8. So there's 2 blocks of 8. Now, the way the list is written, you actually are replacing the spearmen with swordsmen. Now, the list has a maximum of 12 spearmen. So I effectively could only have a single unit of 8 from the size that I've got.
They're not being added.
Yeah, exactly. They're not added, they're replacing. So, but what the list does have is it also has an armored polearm, which has the same allowance, and you can have up to 12 of the armored polearms. So to make the list legal, it would be 1 block of armored spearmen, 1 block of armored polearms, each with 2 melee expert swordsmen, making them 2 blocks of 8. So that makes the list legal, and I think there's a point difference in them either way. So per base, so it makes little odds. Yeah. So that's the first 5 units. The units 6 and 7 are much like Richard's list. You have to have militia fighter and militia archers, which are infantry, tribal flexible, poor, unprotected polearm, and the archers are tribal loose, poor, unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy, 2 blocks of 8, which are the minimums. So that takes you to 7. You've then got the Biash ally. So I've taken the guard cavalry. Again, these have the option to be cataphracts, but I've taken them again as formed loose, superior, protected, experienced bow, short spear, melee expert, block of 6. I've then taken the noble cavalry and the rear rank followers, which are the formed loose, superior, protected, long spear, 3. Back rank is formed loose, average, protected, long spear. Now I've made them combat shy, which Nick didn't do. Block of 3. So it makes it a unit of 6. But the back rank are combat shy. So if you get through to the combat, if you get through to the back rank, the unit's knackered. But anyway, and then the list has provincial spearmen compulsory, which are infantry, formed flexible, average, protected, polearm, block 6. Militia fighters, infantry, tribal, flexible, poor, unprotected, polearm, block 6. And then I've taken some scout cavalry, which are combat shy with Cantabran. Yes, no, maybe. Experienced bow. But I've downgraded
Spanish shooty formation.
I keep trying to say yes. I should just go with Spanish shooty formation. I've downgraded them to poor, which is not ideal, but it gets me the upgrade to the skilled dice for them shooting, which I think is a fair trade. I'm not expecting them to be in a main shooty combat line. They're there to just hang around on the side of the superior cavalry. So there you go. It's 11 tugs, 1 skirmishing sug. Gives you 12 UGs for deployment, 8-4 on the scouting. I'd have preferred higher scouting, but the PBS of 8, I think, slightly mitigates that in that I'll have at least 2 cars that I can choose out of the main block. My thoughts on it were the armoured spearmen and the armoured polearms would form the anvil almost with the cataphracts. Either they're all in one line or the cataphracts behind them. The provincial spearmen from the ally are a useful terrain holder. I'm not looking to fight with those because I only want to use the cavalry, really. It does have 3 militia units that I have to protect, and it's an unfortified camp, which is not great, but I guess if you spread them across the back of the line, you're not going to lose them all quickly. Plus the fact they have to fight through your army to get to it. But yeah. The ethos was basically the 3 blocks of superior cavalry work a flank, where you've got a fairly solid central core that I think the combination of cataphracts, polearms, and long spears means it's not particularly tasty to cavalry. Infantry aren't going to greatly love it either. I quite like the 2 melee expert swordsmen in each unit because once you're engaged, they can flip out quite nicely to the sides, which you can't do with polearm and long spear, obviously, because you have to have the double ranks, because they count as part of the fact of for having 2 ranks in a melee. So you've got something you can expand out. And again, I'm not expecting to win with those, but I am expecting to hold people up, delay them, maybe give the Cataphracts a chance to work around them or come through a gap. So there you go. Anyway, over to you guys.
I'm not a fan of poor Cantabrian cavalry. The double minus if they have to skirmish means I think they're just one-shot wonders, frankly. And you have to get lucky. In terms of the actual army composition, yeah, I'd have to say another army I wouldn't want to fight with the Balhai, I think. Although, does it have enough punch? Probably.
I thought in some ways it shared that with the BS that I did. It's got a bit more punch in terms of its cavalry. It's where to insert some of the units at the right time. Timing will be quite important on this one. I must admit, I don't like the combat shy on the rear rank followers for the Biatch. Not keen. I can see why you've done it, but I'm not keen.
In the spirit of how we usually do these things, if I remove the Spanish squirrely shooty stuff and take off the combat shy from the rear ranks of the noble cavalry, that brings the army to exactly 10,000 points.
Oh,
there you are. I think it's sold.
Yeah, I'd agree with Richard on poor Cantabrian. It's perfectly good if the opponent's army is more like is infantry. This is anything that's got a reasonable speed, they'll just die really quickly.
They actually in my head where I had them was in between 2 of the cavalry units. So if you were charging you can intercept charge, possibly create
or non-skirmishing cavalry in the skirmish away. Yeah.
I mean, all right, yes, as Richard says, it's the double whammy. You might throw one and they still follow on and clobber them.
Yeah,
you take the risk, but
I think losing the Cantabrian and therefore losing the combat shy on the Biash cavalry is a better trade.
Yes, I suspect you're right. Yeah,
it is. And then I think that probably makes this army one that I wouldn't be that wild about using the my Biash army against. Actually, I think this one's a bit punchier, and if I didn't have somewhere I could some terrain to use for the Japanese ally, that could be quite vulnerable.
Yes, because of course, I mean, all the armored could go into the train. All right, charge into you wouldn't be great, but
I mean, it
evens into the fight after that, isn't it?
Yeah, but if it was a pretty open table, you might be able to. You've probably got a better chance of getting a cavalry unit into, say, the average archers in my army. You probably go through them fairly quickly unless I get a really good shot at you coming in.
Yeah, I mean, my instinct, obviously, is, as you say, my addiction to heavy metal was for the all cataphracts, because you can have quite a lot of cataphracts by taking that ally and the internal cataphracts. I don't know, but it just felt with the infantry that you could have and the minimums that you need to protect, it just felt that you needed the faster shock troop.
I suspect if you went really cataphract heavy on it, you have to lose a unit somewhere.
Yeah,
because of the extra cost of the cataphracts, especially if you've got your Sonbei and the Allied Guard cavalry as cataphracts as their superior. You're going to be talking a lot of points there. You're talking, instead of just under 1,200 points a unit, you'll be looking at more closer to 1,500 points a unit for those two, if they become cataphracts.
It comes out at 1308, I think. 1308.
Sorry, yeah, it'll be 13 because So I was thinking about assassins with dev
Yes,
charge.
you with the dev charges, yeah. Exactly. So,
Because that was the last cataphracts I used as well.
yeah, so
yeah, I think you'd have to find some points somewhere.
yeah, it looks like you need about another 400, 450 points to convert the superior cavalry to cataphracts.
Yeah,
which
you might. Yeah, it'd be something you might have to. Well, you could do it with, say, dropping their scout cavalry and maybe just going with a competent CNC, or make him instinctive instead of professional. You could do it.
Yeah, talented instinctive drops me down to 6 PBS and a scouting of 3, which I just feel you need the edge on.
I think you'd probably go for competent professional instead, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
To save some point, if you were going to save points that way, it will keep you. It probably makes you 7-3.
Yeah, it makes me 7-3, but it would give me the 450 I needed to make those cataphracts. Interesting choice, but my control freak nature tends to go towards the talented professional and the faster moving cavalry, quite frankly. But it'd be one to try, I think.
Yeah, I think it's another interesting one. I must admit, before we looked at these, I'd not spent that much time looking at the Koreans. So apart from that Biash one, I knocked up just on a whim, really, some time ago, just as something a bit different to use.
There is one of the Koreans I twigged. I think it's in the Genghis list, which is actually allowed fully armored cataphract charging lancers.
Oh, there is one weirdo, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think it's possibly the only list in the book that, besides if you go for like Italian cataphracts from the Italian wars, effectively, I think is what they become.
Outside of the Western. Charging lancer. Yeah. It's
the Gorai the Korean list, basically the first one in the Genghis, and it's the
Singai Guard.
Yeah, that's the one. And their cavalry.
Superior armored horse, fully armored, charging lancer, melee expert, and you can have up to half of the 12 guard. So they
just one unit then.
So it's one unit, but they are like, in effect, they're like medieval nuns, late medieval nuns, which perhaps are quite generous. Classification.
That's a really unusual one.
Yeah, I think it's the only one you find in the Eastern lists for.
The occasional oddity.
It's also a list where all the infantry can have barricades. Literally, all the infantry can have barricades. But bar the superior guard, they don't have to. I'm guessing they feel secure in their own manhood. They don't need to stand behind a barricade.
Here's a question for us all. None of us went and did Joseon, or however you pronounce it, Korean, the last list in Genghis, which seems to have some fans, and I'm fairly sure you've used it, Matt.
I used it at the last Ice and Fire. I didn't do particularly well with it, but there again, I used a composition for the figures that I'd been given as a Christmas present. So it was a lot of infantry, and I fought Richard with it, in fact, and he handed me my hat and said, "Go away and think about that list."
Because that's one that can have
that's skilled shoot and charge cavalry.
Formed, flexible, average, protected, skilled bow, shoot and charge. Yeah, which is quite a nice
short spear, aren't they? The short spear.
Probably short spear as well. Yeah, but I just remember they're protected, skilled bow, shoot and charge. Yeah, not exactly cheap, but they can be really, really effective.
And they've got some very nice guard lancer, drilled loose. Charging lancer, melee expert as well. So
I think it's been used a few times, and I have an impression, although something like Paul Cummings will be able to tell us, it's not performed as well as you might expect.
It's less than its whole, and I'm not sure if it's. I have a couple of alternatives that I've worked out, which I still haven't managed to get on the table for it. But at the moment, it's performing less than what it's the sum of its parts, shall we say?
Maybe you end up sinking just a few too many points into the good units, and the supporting cast is a bit weak.
I think it's one of those where you feel that you really should be shooting charging with the skilled cavalry, and I think people do it too quickly. It might be one which needs more patience, and you need to pull back a few times, make a bit of a dent, and then shoot and charge with them. Keep retreating back a bit.
I fought it out of competition once, and that's exactly what happened. They were brought up and almost charged as soon as they could. They hadn't softened up their target enough.
Yeah.
Or at all, as it turned out.
Yeah, when you throw that wave of greens and they're all blanks, and you
go,
oh, 6 green dice and nothing.
Yeah, it's just one of those, if you only, that one shot, you could roll skulls with all those dice, and you could roll, but there's more blanks and S's and wounds on those dice, green dice, than there are skulls. So yeah, I wonder if people get trapped into that. They feel they have to charge ASAP.
Yeah, definitely can happen.
Yeah, whereas a bit of patience would be okay. Well, that's our 3 army lists to go with your historical gallop, and so I think we have reached the end of this podcast. And unless either of you have anything you wish to impart to our listeners,
they've probably had enough drivel from me this evening. So.
Not from me.
Okay, so as ever, thank you both very much for this. And you never know, we might, this is being done towards the end of November. We might just get another one in before Christmas. But we shall have to see. As I said, this one was somewhat delayed from when we'd originally planned due to real life, so that could happen again. Anyway, goodbye, good gaming, and hopefully see some of you across the table at some time.
Goodbye all.
Goodbye.